Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's community of practice for Schoolyard Forest. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Again, this is our community of practice for Schoolyard Forest. This is our May session. I will say this a couple of times, but this will be our last session. We'll take a summer break for June and July, and then we'll resume the session back in August. And we'll share some ways you can enjoy your summer. So please rename yourself with your first and last name, your organization that you represent, and your pronouns. We also offer accessibility options, so to view captions if needed. For a live transcript in your Zoom toolbar, you'll see a show captions button, and you can toggle that on. And because this is a Zoom meeting and not a webinar platform, you can utilize the chat throughout the meeting to ask questions and engage. And right now, we'd love for you to share what native lands you are joining us from in the part of the world, recognizing that we all occupy indigenous lands. And if you're not familiar with the native lands or indigenous lands that you currently occupy, we have a resource, native-land.ca, which is by no means an extensive resource, but is definitely a start for you to understand and acknowledge the native lands that you occupy. As I mentioned previously, my name is Mikaela Randolph. I'm the Associate Director of Regional Programs today. I'm also joined by my colleagues, Rachel Pringle, who's our Vice President here at Green Schoolyards America, Lauren McKenna, who's our Senior Program Manager, and Allison Torres, who's our Operation Manager, who will all be helping with some behind the scenes Zoom technical things and engaging with you all in the chat. So thank you everyone on our team that is supporting our webinar today. I've already welcomed you and introduced our team. So today's agenda will be a presentation by our guest speakers featuring Maine and Schoolyard Forest efforts happening in Maine. We'll also engage in discussion with speakers today, and then we'll just close out with some reminders. Just a reminder that today's community of practice is part of the National Schoolyard Forest System, a large-scale initiative to increase tree canopy on public school grounds across the United States to directly shade and protect pre-K through 12 students from extreme heat and rising temperatures due to climate change. California is the first state in the National Schoolyard Forest, and most recently we've been able to welcome New Mexico and Nevada to these efforts. Again, this community of practice is free and open to people working in this field. We hope to foster a welcoming discussion forum with colleagues who are doing work in this space to share information to help establish Schoolyard Forest at scale. And our goal is to build a collegial community of practice and national network to strengthen these efforts. Typically, these community of practice will happen on the third Thursday of each month at 11 a.m. Pacific time. The sessions are recorded, so if you want to revisit this information or you have colleagues who could not attend this live session, you can share the recording with them. As I mentioned previously, we will be taking a summer break for June and July, and we'll resume our next community of practice August 21st. And that will feature work being done in Dallas, Texas. So I hope you will rejoin us for those efforts. And per usual, you'll get reminders. I also just wanted to share a few resources before we get to our speakers. May is International School Grounds Month and California Living Schoolyards Month. And you can celebrate this month by checking out the many resources and activity suggestions in the activity guides available in multiple languages on our website at greenschoolyards.org/guides. There's also, you can explore the educator resources in the Schoolyard Forest system library over the summer, as we will be taking a break. Many of you may be, but many of you may not be taking a break from your Schoolyard Forest work. So just key resources such as preparing for planting, what to do after planting, engaging in stewardship, tree and forest lessons, and activities by subject and by grade level are also available in our Schoolyard Forest resource library. which you can see via the link here. And then also a really interesting activity to possibly explore during the summer is a How Cool is Your Schoolyard activity, which you can also find in our resources, greenschoolyards.org/how cool. This is a great way to engage students, staff, faculty, any time of year to think about their schoolyard, whether you have only asphalt or more green spaces, but really looking at the different spaces on your schoolyard and measuring the temperature. And that data that you're able to collect really helps to provide you with resources and data that you may need to make the case for any key decision makers within your school district. And we've relaunched this session in the fall, and we've been doing a variety of sessions since then. So we just really want to take the opportunity to hear from you around this community of practice series and just get some feedback on the sessions that we've done, what we can improve, what you'd like to see more of. So we really appreciate and would like your feedback via this QR code. And I'm sure the link will also be dropped in the chat. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce our guest speakers today. First, I'd like to introduce Lena Ives, who's the Director of Education for Maine TREE. And Lena is Maine TREE's Education Director, and through this role sustains and expands the organization's capacity to meet the needs of schools, teachers, students, and other partner organizations for environmental education programs connected to Maine's landscape and ecosystem. Lena works statewide and oversees all of Maine TREE's education programs, including school collaborations, the Forest of Maine Teachers Tours, and the Forest Ecology Research Network, also known as FERN. And Lena will also be joined by a colleague that she works closely with, Michele Charete, who began teaching in 1992 after graduating from the University of Maine at Farmington with a Bachelor of Science degree in elementary education. While at her hometown middle school, she taught a number of subjects, including algebra, special education, kindergarten, grades 4, 7, and 8. And in 2004, she earned a master's degree in middle level education. After 23 years, she moved to the Blue Hill area, where she has found her niche teaching middle school math and science at Penobscot Community School. So we're really excited to hear the great work that's been happening in Maine. And as we've said previously, we really are looking to highlight a diversity, both geographically, of stories around schoolyard forests. So without further ado, I'm happy to turn it over to Lena, and I will stop screen share.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to start a little bit just talking about what our work actually boils down to. I, as our education director, and being an umbrella organization, we do a lot of different things, and the common theme is forests. And TREE is actually an acronym. It stands for Timber Research and Environmental Education. But doing all of our education programs, we have a couple that are direct student engagement is what we call them. Our Forest Ecology Research Network essentially takes the process that the Maine Forest Service and the National or Federal Forest Service use to monitor forests over time, which is called the Forest Inventory and Analysis Program. And it brings it down to a student level so that students can keep track of their schoolyard forests over time, or forests that are somewhere close to school. And we also have our Forest of Maine Teachers Tours, which is where I met Michele. We have been doing this since the 90s, so we are 28 years into it, I think, this year. And we bring Maine teachers out to different forest-based sites and have a bunch of different natural resource professionals talk about ongoing projects, what they've been doing at different sites to see phenomena and really action-oriented things that are going on within Maine's forest communities, to both like bring in a bunch of different workforce development and career opportunities for students, but also just to try to break down the different ways that Maine forest can be used in the classroom as well, and highlight some of the ways that it is being used already too. Um, and then one of our newer programs is the forestry immersion program. We work pretty closely with the career and technical education centers in Maine, the CTE schools, and we have a handful of programs for forestry in Maine, but we created a program that's in the summer, so students that don't have access because of district boundaries or just inability to put it in their schedule can get the same experience. So they do a lot with both forest science and research and data collection, and they also get to operate logging equipment and look at that side of things as well. Um, so we have a bunch of different ways in which we kind of bring forests into the classroom. Um, and a lot of what we do in that arena is adapting resources like Project Learning Tree, and making them really Maine specific and using things that we have um, as resources like historic documents and ways that forestry as a science is already doing things and breaking them down into like real world applications of things that we would otherwise be teaching in the classroom. Um, so I wanted to orient you a little bit to Maine. It sounds like from the chat that a lot of folks are from, as Mainers call it, from away. But fear not, I am also from away. I'm not a Mainer, which is a very sore subject for some. Um, but I am from New England. And one of the things that we have, at least in my natural resource degree and in a lot of the forestry natural resource spaces, we talk a lot about the farmland abandonment and the way that, like, essentially the Northeast as a whole has gone through the succession cycle um, in pretty equal pace in the past 400 years since colonization. The way that we developed and deforested the Northeast was pretty consistent across all of New England. And so a lot of the landscape actually was within the same cycle and was abandoned around 1850, if not 1900 or so, and has been left to regrow into forest since then. Um, but there are a couple things that make Maine pretty unique in that case. This map here is showing the ownership of Maine land, and the red here is paper and lumber companies. Um, and this is in the 90s. And over the past 3 decades, a lot of the land that was owned by organizations and businesses was sold to public entities and to different styles of land ownership. And what that did, it actually became like a statewide um, topic of discussion where a lot of private sales wouldn't. But one of the things that the paper and forest companies were doing up until the 90s when they changed their land ownership was making public access to their lands open and available. So those recreating on those lands, whether that be on foot or bike or on ATVs and snowmobiles, it was free access. And as long as you watched out for log trucks, you had no issues. But in the 90s, we had a statewide crisis when the land was sold, and there was a huge statewide discussion about public access to land. So in most states, I grew up in Connecticut, and in Connecticut, to get access to a piece of land that's privately owned, you have to ask permission first and then go on the land once you have that. But in Maine, it's the opposite. Unless somebody has their land posted, you can go on any piece of land that you'd like. And it's a product of that discussion that happened in the 90s, which to me, as someone from away, really has ingrained in the Maine culture the way that we prioritize recreating and access to land. It's something that I actually hear about from like elementary, middle school students, and it's something in the culture that I have found really interesting as somebody that's come from outside of Maine. But I definitely think it's part of the fact that drives a lot of the continued conservation that happens in Maine. We are 90% forested. We're also 90% privately owned, which makes things like conservation really tricky, right? We don't have lands that are owned by BLM. The national and state ownership of land of property is very small. Um, and so a lot of the conservation that happens are just really big group projects. They involve multiple nonprofits and multiple different indigenous organizations as well, and are usually made up of multiple different land trusts or organizations owning lands consecutively or contiguously so that wildlife and recreation can all happen across those borders of ownership. But it happens a lot differently than it does in the rest of the country. Um, and so there's a lot of work and a lot of heart that goes into that. Um, and what that ends up meaning is that for our state to be meaningfully conserved, it really ends up being a mosaic. And the work that we all do in the classroom in terms of environmental education and introducing things like land ethic and having a reciprocal relationship with the environment, that all carries a lot more weight because we are really working with the future landowners of Maine. Um, there are a lot fewer scenarios in our state where there are people in boardrooms making decisions about large swaths of our landscape just because we don't have lands that are owned by, well, we have lands that are owned by the state and the federal government. It's just not a large percent, it's a very small percentage. So we have to make sure that the ways in which we are communicating with these folks is as effective as possible. And it's also, I think that that has trickled down into what is now a really robust environmental education landscape in Maine, which is very, um, it's definitely something we've worked really hard towards. But we have had things like an environmental literacy plan since 2005, and we just released a couple weeks ago our first climate literacy plan, which took the statewide climate plan that we have called Maine Won't Wait, and turned that into a document that's understandable at the middle school level. So it's something that students can interact with and engage with. And one of the things that I've been working on this legislative session has been the Maine Green Schools Network bill, which is hopefully going to establish a green schools network and make spaces for students and teachers to talk about ways that they've incorporated all these different topics into the classroom so that we can make that more accessible. Because just like our landscape, our schools are local control. So things are very hyper localized because of that. And luckily, there are also a lot of land trusts and organizations that do environmental education in Maine. So there are usually opportunities for that to translate to local organizations getting involved with the school districts and that sort of thing. But it does make things a little tricky. Did you wanted to add here, Michelle, too?
Um, just that, I guess, some of the important things that, you might be doing now, um, can be enhanced.
Mm.
A lot of what you see right there in the pictures are what we were doing. Kids, we have a trail and we hang up signs. The student below the young man hanging the sign is making wreaths, and we do this each year. We go out and tip the trees, take the tips off, which is actually environmentally is good for the trees. And you see the girl actually going forth with tipping. And then in the spring, we like to get out into the vernal pools and we do a study and we send data to the state. There's a state pool of data on what we're finding and how climate change has been affecting those.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my, especially with our green schools, um, work, one of my hopes is that we can see a lot of the resilience and sustainability planning that happens on a municipal level start to include the schools. Because it obviously makes a lot of sense when you're talking about town infrastructure, but kids really need something to engage in. They need to, one, see local folks care about these things too, multi-generational intention, but we also need to see kids have opportunities to get involved with these things too. One of our other really one of the things I use a lot and I'm very grateful for that we've had here in Maine is called the Community-Based Environmental Learning Survey. In 2019, we had a couple organizations collaborate on sending out a survey to formal and non-formal educators about, and administrators from public school districts about how they include community and environmental learning in the classroom. And we've done it every 5 years since. And this has resulted in a lot of really great data, both for nonprofits to use to, we use it a lot in grant writing to support why this work is important. But it also has been really validating, I think, in why this work is important too. And it's really added to our why. And one of the things that we found in that survey is teachers were talking a lot about how important it is for local community connections to be made, and both with environmental issues, but also with organizations and people that live within their community that might work on a certain research project or have been really interested in history and culture preservation or something like that. And so a lot of our work has turned out to be multidisciplinary, and just that we are making connections across multiple different groups within the community and the education sphere, which has been really fun. And I think it also brings in like a real world aspect to these things that makes it a little less like, when will I ever use this sort of probing for kids too. One of the things that has really impacted the way that I have done my job over the past few years has been a bill that we passed a couple years ago that created a pilot grant program called the Climate Education Professional Development Project. And we were able to write and then get that bill passed through a bunch of environmental education and educator and students working together. But what it resulted in were grants that allowed us to do professional development with educators to really figure out where things were at their local schools, and then figure out how we can tie in a bunch of different local professionals and organizations and do just what I had just mentioned. But one of the things that has been really foundational for me, at least as a community organization, has been the way in which that admin essentially signs off on these sort of things. So there is permission for educators to really get creative and explore with these sort of initiatives. And just having administrative approval at the outset, it makes a momentum that has been really cool. And it's been also really wonderful to work district and school wide, which is something that I did with Michele, which has been really fun. And yeah, because we are a local control state, which means that there is no statewide curriculum. All curriculum is created by or determined by local school boards and districts. And Michele is even in a school union, which is different in and of itself, in that the school itself is a school district, and there's 5 districts that create a union. So it creates it can get a little tricky sometimes. I do not admire, well, I very much admire and do not wish that I was a curriculum coordinator, because bless their hearts, they do a lot of hard work. But it does mean that there are some really awesome ways for us to really integrate like super local phenomena and things that are going on. When I was in school, I learned a lot about polar bears and rainforests in Connecticut. Like learning about them in Connecticut, I was definitely not near polar bears or rainforests. And so we do a lot about really just making connections across what we're learning in the classroom to what we can really find and see outside to create that learning experience. Did you want to talk about some of these, Michele?
Sure. Quite a few of these are from the Project Learning Tree. They have a set of curriculum that is for teachers, K to 8. In the upper, you see me trying to, the kids had measured a tree. Because being deep in the forest and trying to measure a tree the way I'm doing it there was a bit tricky. So I think we used a flagpole, and I wanted the kids to really kind of hone in, and they were kind of anxious to make sure they got it right. And so you see me doing that. And the lower was, or is a outdoor classroom. It's a low ropes course, and that is actually what we're in the process of building. You'll see some pictures later on of that process, and so I got the chance to visit. Then you see the kids, we marked off a spot, that's in the Project Learning Tree curriculum. And then you see Lena in the bottom there with a group of kids. She came in one afternoon, morning, helped me create our fern plot, and the kids are now identifying the trees. Of course, this was in winter, so we're going to go back out once they have some leaves on them and really make sure to identify how do we do? Did we get it right? And then the young man doing the same. You can see where the trees are tagged, and each year or season, we'll go out and just take a look. We measure the diameter and do some work with the trees, just keeping record of. And I also have dendrometers on order, which will also measure the water intake and to report on the growth of the trees, if they're growing and sustaining, or if they're not doing so well. Because we have a pretty an old forest behind our school, so it'll be interesting for the kids to get a chance to see that.
Definitely. One of the things about Maine is that our forest regeneration is one of the fastest on the globe. So like when I'm weeding my garden at home, I'm picking out little pine trees, because if you don't mow those things, they very quickly want to become forests. And so one of our goals has been to really use forest as a teaching tool as much as possible, because it's super accessible. And in a lot of cases, we don't need to take a bus to get there to bring our students out. And just look at certain aspects. It doesn't have to be a specific species, but if we can look at the overstory or the way that the canopy is functioning, or something like that, we can really make that connection in an ecosystem that's pretty accessible. And Maine also has a pretty extensive history in terms of using forests as a resource, and also having a lot of cultural and community resources that come from forests, both like our economy. The forest product sector is our third biggest economy in Maine, and the biggest economy is our tourism, which arguably is also a forest-based economy. But really integrating these things is one of the concepts we try to do the most. But I did mention Project Learning Tree, I think at the beginning, Michele did too. But I'm the Project Learning Tree coordinator in Maine. And what that has boiled down to for me has been making the resources that Project Learning Tree has, and really making them as local as possible. And a lot of that has been doing some primary and secondary source research, and building in some history aspects, and making the species and those sorts of succession related tidbits about Maine forests as integrated as possible. But luckily there's a Project Learning Tree coordinator for every state. So regardless of what state you're in, you can get connected with one of those folks who can usually help out with these things, or direct you to someone who can. One of the gaps that well, myself and my executive director, we both come from a natural resources and forestry background. And so one of the pieces of feedback that we had gotten quite a bit from our professional development in our first year or two was that we didn't include climate And it really broke our brains when we heard that, because to us, climate is everything. It's not like a unit that we include. It is in every species that we talk about. There's a certain invasive or a pest or something like that that's involved. And in every professional that we talk about, their careers are different now or are evolving in a way that is impacted by climate. But one of the results of that piece of feedback was we really wanted to figure out how to put that on paper. And so I created this framework for our approach to outdoor and climate education. And one of the biggest pieces for me is that it boils down to things that are multidisciplinary and not tied to grade level. I don't love grade level related things. The week that I was with Michele's students, I was with her middle schoolers one day, and the day before was with another group of middle schoolers. The first group of middle schoolers, who were not Michele's, were consuming a lot of things from the forest floor, more than my toddler consumes from the forest. And Michele's students were talking to me about the different growth rates and which tree species was the fastest grower and those sorts of things. So it varies a lot. So anyways, I try to make things that are hierarchical in the way that you can get as specific and as in depth and detailed and hyper local as you want, but it can also be done anywhere. It doesn't have to be tied to something super specific. So you can, it's you choose your own adventure sort of thing. And that's kind of impacted the way we've gone about making our resources more recently as well. We've really tried to get as broad as possible. And instead of saying, looking at a pine forest, we try to make our resources look at the overstory and the midstory and the understory. So that regardless of what kind of forest you have, you can look at those sorts of things. And even if you really don't have many trees at all, but you've been working on planting them or just taking an assessment of what you do have, you can touch into wherever it is you are in that cycle, whether it be the succession cycle or yeah, a certain aspect of the school year, the phonological cycle, that sort of thing. And this is just one of the really cool primary sources that I found. I This is the first like go at aerial maps that we really had as like a human society, if you will. And it really kind of, I mean, I grew up in the 90s. I knew a time when I didn't think in Google Maps, but it had kind of not occurred to me that we hadn't really had that view of our landscape prior to. And so that was a kind of cool realization to me, because kids now wouldn't have really considered that we might not have known what our landscape looked like without Google Maps. And I was able to overlay this map, to what it actually looks like today. And one of the things that I found really interesting is, if you look in the center here, they took what was a marshland and made it into, that's a grocery store that floods every time we get a storm, which is so interesting, isn't it? So I think those sorts of things are really fun to talk about and involve kids in, and say, oh my gosh, well, if we fully thought about that, maybe we would have made a different decision. But one of my overarching pieces that I have been trying to make as loud or as big as a take home as possible is that this whole process of integrating outdoor and forest-based learning is just that, it's process. And it's not something that's linear. You don't get to an endpoint where you are an outdoor 100% outdoor school. I mean, maybe you do, and that's so wonderful, but most people don't. And so wherever you are within this process, there are going to be ups and downs, and you're already doing it. That is usually one of the big pieces that I'm trying to hammer home. But this levels approach is something that comes from a multicultural education paper that I just really liked, because it's kind of like a spectrum where, of course, we always would love to be a level 4 in terms of making concepts that are environmental or culturally intensive or diverse, super integrated, but it's not always possible. And so sometimes we just end up doing a level one approach that's fairly basic, and a brief touch on something else because that's all we have time for. Um, yeah. What do you want to add here, Michele?
Yeah. Yeah, so as Lena said, at any given time, you're not really striving for that level four and maintaining that. Um, you can kind of see in some of the activities we're doing in the upper, the kids are actually off ice skating. Um, and we do that as a school group. We hike into a pond and we ice skate. Um, we take care of the alewives that come in and make their way up the rivers. They migrate from the ocean and they're trying to get up to where they would spawn. And so we help that path. You see a young man with a net full of alewives he's pretty proud of, and they're portaging them. We last year we didn't have a lot of rain. This year they're moving pretty smooth. I was up there the other day and they're moving pretty smooth, but this case last year, we had to actually help. We have a school garden that we will be planting soon, and you'll see some more pictures of that. We go outside, we make scarecrows in the fall with the kids. You see the picture of the skull that was on one of our walks through our forest. One of the students happened to find and brought that with him. We hatch and raise salmon, and you see the kids releasing those into a specific location. And the other thing is we drag for ticks. We have deer, dog ticks. I'm sure there's other kinds, but we do a study with the University of Maine on that one. Um, and so we try to each month go out. Last time, our north end of our trail, this was kind of interesting, found 25 dog ticks in only like 3 or 4 of the deer. Our south end trail found more deer than dog. And so it was kind of, the kids were pretty interested in knowing what the results. So they'll be analyzed, come back. We'll know which ones were actually infected with the Lyme diseases, and so the kids will study those. But stuff that you're already doing is something you want to take a look at and maybe take it to the next level. Um, and yeah, don't think of it as a linear path because it's not.
Yeah, I've done a lot of local translation almost, if you will. Taking a look at scope and sequences and making them just native species, taking out the parrots and putting in pileated woodpeckers or what have you. Um, and one of the things that really a lot of this boils down to, at least for me, is how can we add in um, this concept of land ethic or a at least a relationship with the environment as one of the biases that our students carry. We all have a whole bunch of biases that we carry around, but I like to use the concept of two-eyed seeing um, from the Mi'kmaq tribe. That is one of our Wabanaki Confederacy tribes, and really use that as a way to kind of get at what I'm trying to describe. They do it in a lot better words, but essentially looking at both the cultural or the indigenous science sort of aspect of things and also the Western science. So the two eyes, one is Western and one is indigenous science. And so really knowing that um, the relationship we have with the environment is 50% of it. And so where we can introduce students to the outside and really just start to make them comfortable there, no matter what that looks like, whether it's a really overgrown forest or it's just a really bare schoolyard, if we can get them comfortable and feel like they have the capacity to create a more long-term relationship with whatever nature is around them, I think we're getting there. These days, you don't always know that students are getting outdoor time at home. And so making sure that they have it at school has been one of our big goals here in Maine.
And I just have to add on to that one of the pieces that I plan to incorporate next year is actually having the kids make a land acknowledgement.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
as we go to different places, that we acknowledge the Wabanaki lands, the Penobscot people, um, and that does help in regards to how they treat it when they get out
mm,
there. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I love that concept. I think it takes something that can definitely become kind of superficial and just something you read off a slide and make it something that students can buy into and really have in the back of their minds. And um, I think they ask really great questions about these things, and we can end in, or I've ended up in some really cool discussions with students around what it means to be a landowner, and like what that actually looks like. Because that concept of ownership, I would much rather be like a two-way street rather than just like holding a deed.
Yeah, in the Project Learning Tree curriculum, there's a great one in there that like to do with my 7-8 students. And we bring the Blue Hill Heritage Trust foresters in, and the kids are actually given a plot of land. They're told there's a
Mm,
sanctuary piece, and whatever. And the kids, I mean, it was the first time doing it. I looked through, I didn't have any pictures from it, of their work, but they created these great maps. They get up, they did a presentation. They did all the math to go along with it. There was a series of math to say, if you cut down this tree, how much you were going to lose in monies or gain because you sell it, and how to best use the land in the long run. And I plan to do that again this fall.
that's a staff favorite for us over here.
So, what you see in the pictures, are just projects that we currently do. We do the vernal pool studies. We do tree ID. We love to look at the tree cookies. We make our own tree cookies and tell a story about the lines and how we got scarred or whatever. We do soil testing. We study invasive species. In Maine, the ash tree it's the origin of the Wabanaki. And so we study the emerald ash borer, which just this year came to our area. It's about 30 miles from us now. And so we study that and what that's going to mean. And along with that comes, a celebration too if you don't find anything.
Mm,
That's the thing. The kids always want to say, "Oh, I got to find this and I got to find." Well, what happens if you don't? You got to celebrate that too. And so, it I think that's one thing that helps the kids build some empathy and different thoughts that, oh, it doesn't always have to be that I find it, that because it's not there is great. You see a young man using the tick drag, and just being outside. We go outside to fly paper airplanes. And you see Lena again with the tree plot. And one thing that our PE teacher likes to do, she takes the kids out all the time. We have a low ropes course, but each year with the 7-8, she'll build a fire. She'll teach them to build a fire, how to take care of it. And then the celebration is they get to bring the littles out, and they actually make s'mores and cook hot dogs. We spend a day doing that in the cold winter. And then this is basically what our campus looks like right now in the spring of the year. We're actually looking pretty green. We have a tree orchard, which we help maintain totally with the kids. School garden, again, we're remodeling some things. We need new beds. Some of those have worn out. So we will actually do a garden day where different things around the school get planted. Any projects we have going will take place. We have picnic tables, thanks to COVID. We got lots of picnic tables, but we now have some so that they are strictly in the garden and in the orchard. You see those pictured, those will go there. Our trail was recently revamped a little bit. It was widened, and you can see we put down some of the chips. You actually see, we have a 1.5 mile trail that goes out through the woods. Our cross-country team uses it. It used to get really muddy. And so with the help of the chips, that has helped. And you see the kids and the teachers standing on top of the pile of chips that needs to be moved. So that will be our garden day project. And then, as I told you earlier, we're in the process of making a low ropes course. So the PE teacher and I are working on that. We're also working on some signs that we can put out on the trail. I don't know if you can see the stake in that picture, but we'll have big informational. So I'm going to have the kids come up with the ideas, like a place where there's one where the vernal pools will be. We hope to make a pollination garden, but the kids are going to actually make the signs, or at least design the signs. And we hope to have them professionally done so that they'll be there for, when kids bring their kids back to walk the trail. That's our hope.
But a lot of this was just in the past few years, right?
It's been since, well, I'll tell you, the jumping off point was the tour, the forest tour, was the eye opener for me. And this has just been within 2 years. Yep.
Yeah. We also have a lot of schools in Maine that have either remnant like logging trails. They might also be like used to be roads in some cases, but they have things that definitely were not made for like a hiking trail, but schools have been able to turn them into that, which has been really cool, and easier than starting from scratch. And so working with what we got is usually what we find works best, of course. But one of the things that I really love to overemphasize, especially in Maine, is that, well, and in general, forestry has really only existed for 100 or so years. The first graduating class of VL Forestry School was just the 1920s or so, I believe, maybe earlier, a little bit earlier, but not by much. And especially in the scale of forests and forest ecosystems, like we're all just guessing, really. Um, and so I think that involving students in making and involving youth, of course, more generally, in how we make these decisions, and also having them know that we're all just trying to figure it out and use the different kind of perspectives we have and biases we have bopping around in our brains to make those decisions. This is one of the student pages from Project Learning Tree that I love to bring up and use like before and after I do a lesson or a unit with students, to really see that these things change all the time, and that by integrating the environment and having that be one of our core values and consistencies, it makes it so that we're having different perspectives and making different decisions around these issues or conversations, decisions that we get the opportunity to be included in. But I also just wanted to include at the end here some of my quick tips. One of the things that I really love to do is start with a story. So if I'm going out to talk about maple syrup, which is very big in Maine, it's what like every single classroom does in March. Not because of the trees, primarily because it involves pancakes when you are able to include that. And I really like to talk about the first time that I saw maple syrup was at a living history museum. And so I got to see the way that the indigenous folks of Massachusetts were originally doing maple syrup production, and then how we did it when we adapted that process in the 1820s or so, well, probably before, as Europeans, and then what it looks like today. But I also, one of my very big tips is that you don't have to know all the answers. And sometimes when students have questions that we don't feel like we can answer, it can lead to really fun conversations around finding the answer, or not even conversations, but maybe a whole process of finding the answer to the question. and using the resources we have. And at the very end of the day, our biggest experience or our biggest goal should be a positive experience. I've spent my whole session with students where we had a whole bunch of goals, just talking about how gross and weird mushrooms are, because that's what they were focused on for the day. It's where we were at. So if we can really try to just meet everybody's needs as much as possible, obviously it's a big goal in and of itself, but that's usually my takeaway. Um, yeah, that's all that I had. Michelle, did you want to add anything else?
I know somebody's trying to get back. Somebody in the group had asked about the citizen science.
Oh yeah.
And we use a lot of the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. They have a lot of different community science. But if you're working on any of your projects, Code app, if you're not familiar with it, is a great place to go. I haven't got into it as much as one of my ed techs who she's gone over the top with it. I'll put the name of it in the chat. And she uses it and it has its own layer of data in it dealing with climate change. And so you can go in and you can tell it to graph certain aspects of the data and you can limit it. Yeah, you can go crazy with it. We use it for our ticks and our vernal pools because we're tracking caddisfly, fairy shrimp. And so all that data is in there too. So that app is a great one to look at.
I'll also say there are a bunch of different community science initiatives we have in Maine. GMRI is one of them. And one of the things that I've found is protocols are really hard to follow, and it can be really tricky with geographic location or like whether or not you have location turned on in the iPad you're using, and all of that stuff can be sometimes hiccupy with working with different schools depending on their policies and all that stuff. And one of the things our Forest Ecology Research Network is a community science initiative, and we're lucky if the trees don't shrink in a lot of cases because it's student collected data. We don't have the capacity to do a bunch of the data cleaning that would be required to make the database of all of the different schools and plots that we have. So a lot of that data is used more for student comparison from their school to another school. And it builds out on the forest inventory and analysis program that the Maine Forest Service and the Federal Forest Service use. So I have really found a lot of value in having those community science initiatives where like students can see how they're contributing and how it relates to the bigger picture. And also no pressure. You don't need to get this right and it doesn't have to be perfect. And also if you don't get the time to report data, like that's totally fine. We don't need that to be a requirement because some of the protocols can be kind of intimidating. So anyways, love community science. And when there's easier approaches, I also love those too.
Well, thank you so much, Lena and Michelle. I think you shared so much really good, compelling information. I mean, it's really interesting to see how a state so well forested as Maine, could still need such intentionality around connecting children to those spaces. And the middle school, I feel like Michelle offered so much insight on like middle schoolers and how they're engaging in these spaces. And so that feels really exciting and promising. So one, want to say thank you both so much for your sharing and hope you folks will use your reaction buttons and provide some gratitude in the chat. And I think there are a couple of questions here. I know Lauren dropped a few of the resources you mentioned. And if either of you want to share your contact information with folks on
Yeah.
this session, you can drop it in the chat too, just so folks can have it. Someone asked, curious how involved schools are with community science and broad recommendations for schools who want to begin the community science using their schoolyard or areas adjacent to the school. So I think you answered that question a little bit already, Michele, right?
Yeah, I think reaching out, like Lena said, like when we do our tree plots, we reach out to other schools. Through Maine Tree, we've been able to connect with, and so just even just the 5 schools in my district, our union, we are able to reach out.
Great, thank you. And then someone said that they're curious to learn more about the involvement with a 5-year community-based environmental learning assessments. Are those administered by Main Tree, or are you a community partner in those assessments?
Yeah. So that initiative is something that happens on a statewide scale. It is not done by our organization. It's organized by the Maine Math and Science Alliance and Maine Environmental Ed Association. So the NAAA, I always forget that one. Affiliate in Maine. And the so Maine Math and Science Alliance has a bunch of researchers who do the administration and then the assessment after. Um, and I believe that there's a raffle for participation for teachers as well. But they also help orgs like ours do evaluation for both statewide programs that we participate in and just separate initiatives too. So we have some evaluations and stuff that they've created for us as well. Um, yeah.
Great. Yeah. And then there's another question from the same participant, also curious how teacher and administrator participation and feedback is incentivized or encouraged.
I think they definitely had a raffle for teachers, or maybe it was for everyone. Where if you participated, you would get entered into a raffle. I think the way that they also were able to pitch it as like, even if you're starting with nothing or you haven't started yet, like this is still really solid information for us to have. We also have organizations like the Maine Curriculum Leaders Association, which is a nonprofit here in Maine, and the Maine Principals Association. I'm not sure how consistent those are in different states, but those were also ways that they were able to get in touch with those specific groups of school folks, and that was super helpful because getting to those folks can be really tricky. So being able to get directly into their inboxes and share that opportunity so we could get a well-rounded sample was nice, and I believe that they did get a pretty well-rounded contribution from non-formal, formal, and admin folks as well.
Great. Thank you. It doesn't look like there's a ton of questions here, but I'm just going to share our last slide, just encouraging people to fill out our community of practice survey, and just want to thank folks one more time for joining us. If you have some burning questions and you want to stay on the line for a few minutes, then you're welcome to do that. But we really appreciate you attending this session and look forward to seeing you all in August. Enjoy your summer and please take the survey.